Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents George Washington is Cash Money, a no-bullshit guide to the United Myths of America, by Cory O'Brien. Narrated by Cory O'Brien. To my dad and the rest of We Tell Stories, for teaching me and thousands of other kids how stories are meant to be treated. Introduction, or emergency toilet paper. Sup, guys? One of the things that happened while I was researching this book was that I started reading the introductions to a lot of other books, and I decided maybe my book should have a good introduction too. Introductions are important in books of history and mythology because they're where authors get a chance to tell you how biased they are. Me? I'm hella biased. I think the story of the United States is one long, violent soap opera where the best people get killed young and the worst people get rich. But I'm one of the beneficiaries of that story, and the story's not over yet. See, the other thing I believe is that history and mythology are the same thing. They're stories we dredge out of our past in order to make sense of the present, and those types of stories are always going to be necessary. But the stories themselves, and who the main characters are always going to be changing. Around the turn of the 20th century, we started a big philosophical movement called the Enlightenment. Thomas Jefferson was a big fan of it, as were a whole group of scientists and poets and philosophers. The idea was that we were smart enough, technologically advanced enough, to throw off old superstitions and look at the world through the lens of pure reason. Though these guys were mostly too nervous to say it, Enlightenment philosophy was a pretty big diss to the old concept of religion. Rumor had it that Jefferson was an atheist, but atheism wasn't cool in those days, so if he was, he kept it under his wig. More and more, though, people started to turn to science to answer their questions about the world. And suddenly, the old gods weren't so attractive anymore. Myth became a bad word, as you've maybe noticed if you've ever been on Snopes or read a listicle about dumb, wrong things people think you should eat. But when we told the old gods to fuck off, we found ourselves in need of new ones. And no place felt this more than the United States of America. The country is way young, like barely legal, plus the separation of church and state makes it almost impossible to have an official mythology. People need to believe in something, though, so the U.S. has slapped together its own myths, centered around the Founding Fathers, around science, around the invisible hand of the market. Presidents, gangsters, serial killers, and rock stars are our new pantheon. Politicians invoke the names of Reagan and the Roosevelts. Pop stars are avatars of Marilyn Monroe and Elvis Presley. We put their faces on our money, name our streets after them, erect big stone dicks over their graves. That last part never changes. I've done my best to make the stories in this book as historically accurate as possible, but I've also kept a lot of the juicy rumors in, because those are part of history too. Part of the mythology. I've also used some terminology that isn't exactly politically correct, so let me throw in a quick disclaimer. I know there are other Americas besides the United States of America, and I know the people who originally inhabited the United States of America were not in fact Indians from India. I'm using these common, if outdated, terms because they fit on the short lines I use, and because sometimes it actually serves to point out the ridiculousness of the terms, and because the language I use is a casual, rough, technically incorrect version of English. Which brings me to why I'm here. I'm here to educate you about the mythology of the United States, the same way we get educated about the mythology of the Greeks and the Romans. Well, not exactly the same way. I've stripped off a lot of the pomp and circumstance. I've added a lot of dick jokes and pop culture references. My friend Soren drew some sweet pictures for you to look at, which unfortunately you will be denied in this audiobook version. I guess what I'm saying is that this book is here to educate you about the mythology of the United States the way the Greeks and Romans were educated about theirs, back when their shit was new. Two Stupid Jerks Invent Food, a Cherokee creation story. So a long time ago, there was absolutely fuck all in the entire universe. Then a little while later, there was some stuff, either because gods made it out of clay and boredom, or just because. At first, all the stuff is underwater, at least according to most dudes. But Waterworld is a terrible movie, so all the gods and sassy animals finally wise up and decide to have land. And some of this land is a lame-sounding place called Turtle Island. Wait, I mean North America! Yeah! Woo! But so now there's all this sweet land and nobody to ruin it. Enter humans. There are a few theories about how humans entered, like out of the underworld, or from the east, or space, or maybe the gods just had some extra dirt to burn, but whatever. Everyone agrees dudes started existing at some point, and that it was a generally bad idea. Great, so the universe exists, and there are dudes in it, but riddle me this. What are these dudes gonna eat? Don't worry, friends. The Cherokee people got this one covered. See, shortly after all this world-creating stuff, there's this guy named Kanati. Kanati has a wife named Selu, and a son named Good Boy, because this is olden times and names are scarce. Good Boy has a special friend who hangs out with him by the river when his parents aren't around. Good Boy, being a good boy, tells his parents, who are like, stranger danger, and hatch a plan to catch this man. This is the plan. The next time Good Boy sees his friend, whose name is Wild Boy, he's supposed to wrestle him to the ground and then call his parents, never stopping to consider that this may be exactly what Wild Boy wants. Anyway, it happens, and instead of getting registered as a sex offender, Wild Boy gets to live with the rest of the family as their adopted son, which would be fine, except that Wild Boy is a garbage person. Let me explain. Every day, Kanati goes out hunting, and every day he comes home with a ton of meat. And Wild Boy is like, I wonder if I can ruin this. So he takes Good Boy and they go spy on their dad, and it turns out he has this cave covered with a rock, and when he moves the rock, a deer comes out, like a delicious Easter-time Jesus, and then he shoots that deer with an arrow and puts back the rock, and everyone gets deer burgers. Of course, the two boys decide to try this themselves. This would not be a myth if people didn't suck. So they go to the cave and move the rock, but they forget to put it back, unleashing a gushing fire hose of woodland fauna, a delicious stampede of totally unshootable game, raccoons and badgers and land squids and gerbils, and turkeys. Turkeys are very important. But all anyone manages to shoot is one deer's tail, which curls up, and that's why deer are all that way. Anyway, then Kanati shows up like, oh hell no, you know what happens when you free the animals? I'll tell you what happens. Bees! So he goes into the back of the cave and opens up several cans, which might have contained whoop-ass at a different time, but instead contain every kind of insect. And they're stinging the shit out of these boys until Kanati decides they've had enough. And then he's like, great job, assholes. Now we have to learn how to actually hunt. But the boys aren't about to be doing real work, so they go home and ask their mom, Selu, for food. And she's like, we have no food. Because of you. Assholes. But they're still her kids, even though they suck. So she goes up to the storeroom to get some grain, and they follow her because they still suck, and they watch her conjure beans and corn by laying out a bowl and rubbing herself a lot. So they're like, holy shit, Mom, are you a witch? And she's like, oh, you think I'm a witch, huh? Well, how about this? When I die, drag my clothes around a field 7 times and corn and beans will grow there overnight. Now who's the witch, huh? And the boys are like, still you. So Selu dies despite them, and they half-assedly follow her instructions. Like, they only clear a little bit of land, and they only drag her clothes around twice, but they still get corn and beans, so whatever. And then Kanati gets home from trying to find all the animals, and he's like, where's my wife? And they're like, oh, you mean Selu? She turned into a witch and then died. And Kanati is like, oh my god, fuck you guys! I'm gonna go live with the wolves. So he does, and he sends the wolves to kill the boys, but they trap them with magic, and almost drive wolves to extinction. And then they teach everyone how to plant corn and get reunited with their mom and dad in the land of the rising sun. But their parents still hate their guts, for many good reasons, so they have to go live on the other side of town, in the bad neighborhood, where the sun sets. But at least they have corn. All of which just goes to show that agriculture is for jerks. They all laughed at Christopher Columbus because he was dumb. But what's the point of all this sweet land and corn if it never gets found by any white people? I'm glad you asked, ethnocentric reader, because it's time for me to tell you the story of history's #1 entrepreneurial sea jerk. I refer, of course, to Christopher Colombo. Wait, shit, that isn't his name.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?